Welcome to this latest edition of the Food Systems Podcast, brought to you by the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. I'm Mark Titterington, and I'll be your host for the next 20 to 30 minutes. And today we're joined by two esteemed guests, John Clarke, former head of the EU delegation to the World Trade Organization and the UN in Geneva, also a fellow of Maastricht University, and of course Tassos Haniotis, former director at DG Agriculture in the European Commission and a senior guest researcher at IIASA. Gentlemen, a very warm welcome to you both. We're talking trade and geopolitics and impacts on agri-food today. John, I might start with you. We have seen some fairly extraordinary geopolitical developments, let's call it that, over the past couple of months. How would you characterize these and the implications for trade generally, and perhaps the rules-based system overall?
Well, what we've seen, Mark, is something which started small, an attempt by the USA to remove its trade deficit with China, has morphed into something much more fundamental. I mean, I think the Make America Great Again concept is about asserting US hegemony in the face of an increasingly expansionist and aggressive China. So it's as much political as commercial. And it's about using trade policy to make geopolitical shifts. And what we're seeing is essentially not only a threat to the global economy, but upturning the system that the US created in 1945. The casualty of Trump's national security, Make America Great Again policy is to dismantle the institutions which were set up in 1945 and which have been the a source of economic growth for the USA and the world, and poverty reduction globally. So, we are seeing the end, I think, of the RBIO, the rules-based international order. The WTO is being trashed by the USA. They are dismantling or disengaging from other international institutions, and they're returning to the law of the jungle, where might is right. Whether it's on relations with Israel and Gaza, Ukraine, Russia, or the severing of the US's bilateral trade partnerships with Canada, Mexico, and others. So I think what we're seeing is something very, very serious indeed, which goes far beyond trade.
Do you think it may be a semantic point, John. Do you think it's more by accident or design? And by that I mean, is the attempt to exert American hegemony, as you've described it, are they looking to take down the rules-based international order because they've seen that as an impediment, do you think? Or is it as a casualty of that primacy of Make America Great Again?
I think they see that as an impediment. We're back in a phase of American exceptionalism. Of a kind we haven't not seen for a long time. So certainly the USA feel that the international order is a constraint on American power. It has helped China to become a strategic rival and an economic equal in a multipolar world. So the strategy is very, very deliberate. It's a very, very foolish strategy. I cannot imagine how America can be made great again if it disengages from all of its international commitments and relationships. That will weaken the USA. So the strategy is going to fail, but there'll be very high cost to pay for the world.
Maybe broaden it out to you both. I do want to come back to that point about the extent to which they see it in their interest, the Americans see it in their interest, John. How do you both assess the immediate response that we've seen from the international community generally and the EU in particular? John, maybe to you first, and then Tassos, would love your perspective on that.
Well, there hasn't been a unified response from the international community. It's been rather sporadic and fragmented, but we are seeing some healthy signs coming out of the European Union, Mexico, Canada, China, some others. What we need to see is a very, very well-coordinated, unified retaliation against this U.S. unilateral behavior. That's the only language which Trump understands. So that needs to be pursued seriously, and any kind of effort to appease the USA will simply aggravate the trade tensions. So a coordinated retaliation is I think, fundamental. The consumers would be well advised to stop buying American goods and services. So people power can be very, very influential here. The rest of the world should, of course, signal, as the EU has done, we are willing to negotiate with the USA in a fair way, because we don't want to have an economic recession globally or a fully fledged trade war. And the private sector needs to, rather than sit back and wait, needs to do its own risk analysis to see where it needs to de-risk from US trade relations or the like. So I think there's in several respects, the community, the world community needs to operate in that way. Retaliation, consumers, business, and openness to negotiate on the right terms.
Just to push on that point though, John, isn't that kind of a retaliation likely to more inflame things than what they already are? I mean, why do you take such a hard line on that approach?
Well, I think if you look at the opposite, if there is no retaliation, then the USA and Trump will conclude that he can get away with murder, that there is no price to pay for unilateral WTO illegal trade behavior. You take the example of the threatened 200% tariff on European wines and spirits that Trump announced will come on the 1st of April, unless the EU removes its tariff on US bourbon. Right? Yeah. Macron 2 days ago said in a speech we should not put tariffs on American whiskey. Yeah, and then in that, and if we don't put tariffs on whiskey, if we don't retaliate, Trump will drop his 200% wine tariff. I don't believe that for a moment. It will simply demonstrate to Trump that might is right, and that these threats work, and there's no comeback.
Tassos, you've seen a fair bit in your career. Do you agree with the direction that John is taking there, or what's your perspective on how the international community and EU is responding?
I mostly agree with what John says. I mean, as somebody that has spent 11 years of my life in the States, when I see what is happening, one of the things that comes to mind is this song of my favorite group, the R.E.M., that used to start their career in the same place that I was studying in Athens, Georgia. So it's the end of the world as we know it. The only thing is if we feel fine, as the song said, or not. And I think most of us don't feel fine with what we see out there. I would add a couple of things to what John said. First of all, there is a total upheaval in the balance of power and the checks and balances in the U.S. system between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, in a manner that you just see what is happening on a daily basis surprises everybody. Second, the world system of alliances, as we know it, has changed completely, and we still don't know where it's going to stabilize. And third, there is an issue that, in my view, also is very important, that has to do with the basic civility in relations at the political level. I mean, if you just listen to the arguments, the manner by which the speaking is taking place, it's really shocking, unless that's the new standard we want to set, and then people will have to keep following it. So I think there has to be a firm response. What I think we shouldn't do is look on a daily basis on what Trump is saying and try to respond on a daily basis on that. But we need to try to anticipate the areas where what he has set in place are going to go potentially wrong and blow in his face. I believe that on trade, sooner or later, they will have to discover the inflationary pressure that all these measures put, especially because inflation seems to be the number one item that determines what happens in European elections, because the polarization that they had before meant that the swing votes had to choose one of these issues, and it was this one. Then, apart from trade, or what will happen in Ukraine, and the manner by which all this alliance of what is called the West has been actually betrayed within by the President of the United States, is also a pretty shocking development. And it is exactly because of that that people have to draw a very firm line. I mean, it's a typical case. If they slap you in the face, do you turn the other cheek or not? And on international relations, you better not do it, because then you give more space to people to continue what they're doing and consider that what they have done is the right path. And I don't think we believe it's the right path.
You and I spent a little bit of time at the United States Department of Agriculture's Outlook conference, which took place at the end of last month, a regular, obviously annual event. When you think about the context of the discussions that we're having today, and this obviously happened over the last couple of months, what were the key insights and takeaways that you took from the Outlook conference in terms of the environment in which that took place, both domestically for US farmers as well as internationally?
Well, it's not the first time. It's actually the 9th time that I've been over the years in the USDA Outlook conference. If there is one thing that characterized this one compared to the previous ones, is the mood. I mean, you could sense that in a city that so much depends on the federal government, there is an enormous uncertainty about what will happen in the future. And that does not only affect federal employees, it also affects all this ecosystem of consultants, firms that work around the federal government that have a great uncertainty about what will happen. The second thing that characterized the conference is the fact that this is a forum that shows what is good about America, the extremely high level of technical capacity of the Economic Research Service, the Office of the Chief Economist, and generally USDA, and the very important focus they had on the issues that actually shape the lack of competitiveness and the problems facing the U.S. agricultural sector, which, by the way, were not what the U.S. president seems to say, but much deeper. They have to do with the structure of trade, with the fact that the Americans are still very much dependent on bulk commodities. That's part of their policy. There were some interesting discussions about what innovation is doing. There were cases where climate change, despite the official policy, came up strongly as one of the big challenges. And what also came, at least in one of the sessions that I participated, was the fact that why they do have, for example, very advanced programs and algorithms to follow natural disasters and determine the compensation they provide in terms of insurance. Because of that, the NOAA, the National Ocean and Atmospheric Agency, is about to be significantly cut, if not destroyed completely, and that's where they base their analysis. So it's a very mixed type of picture that, to my view, it was also indicative of the type of problems that the federal government, including the parts of the federal government that is very important, will face. And the last point that came out in all the sessions and informal discussions is, what about trade? I mean, what is happening here and what are the impacts going to be? Because American farmers, despite what their president said, they're not going to have fun with what is actually happening.
Yeah. John, I want to come back to you as well on looking at this from a purely domestic perspective in the US. So Tassos and I spent time at the Outlook conference in Washington. From my own conversations and time in the US since the turn of the year, to play devil's advocate, you have a politician in President Trump that is arguably delivering on the promises that he made. Most of it has been well signposted, and he's followed through, and that seems to have had some resonance in terms of what Americans are feeling and saying. And perhaps there is an understandable perspective that America has not only adopted the responsibility of being the world's policeman, if we want to call it that, but also funded it. And by doing what he's doing, he's forcing questions onto the table that haven't been onto the table for several decades. Isn't, therefore, when you look at it from that perspective, quite logical what President Trump is doing, even if the rest of the world, and Europe in particular, doesn't like it?
I think the only positive thing that's come out of his policies so far is that it's made Europe more united than it was. That's the only silver lining I can see in his Make America Great Again agenda. If you look at it from any other point of view, we're seeing inflation in the USA, stock market not collapsing but contracting dramatically. The losses on the stock exchange in the US last week were the equivalent to the annual GDP of Russia. It's as big as that. Dismantling of the international order, which makes USA weaker. The agricultural sector, as Tassos has said, is already suffering from the trade policies that Trump is pursuing. China is no longer buying American soya or maize, and but that market will not come back in a hurry because agriculture needs stability and predictability in the medium term. So that market could be gone forever, and there are job losses in the States affecting the white American male who is Trump's voter base. So as far as I can see, it's a disaster across the board, and so he's delivering what he said he would do in terms of foreign policy and trade policy, but the result is extremely damaging for the United States economically and politically.
So, I mean, you would clearly disagree with administration officials then that say that a short period of turbulence as the U.S. economy is in transition is to be expected, and they will come out of the other end of that. Your argument is that actually that instability will be persistent and will cause damage to the U.S. economy and U.S. voters.
I think it's more likely to be persistent and causing long-term damage. One of the reasons for that is that it is impossible for the U.S. to control, combat, or discipline China. Like it or not, we're in a multipolar world. China is still in the ascendant. It's overtaking the USA in many, many sectors. It has a 20-year policy vision, and that factor alone means that the US is no longer going to be able to play the role it has traditionally in the global economy or in politics.
So John's view will have an increasingly assertive but potentially weaker US, the rise of China. Tassos, let's talk about the agri-food system and the implications of that and the implications for Europe. Where do your levels of optimism or indeed pessimism lie for the EU agri-food system? And of course, we had Commissioner Hansen's vision for the future of agriculture in Europe. Where do you feel that things are? Where are we on the journey, so to speak, and where do you think it'll lead us?
Well, I think that it's good that after 5 years of bashing European agriculture and considering that everything that goes wrong on this planet is linked to agriculture, at least we have a much more balanced approach. And we start focusing on the strategic role that the EU agricultural system plays, because it is a system that is innovative. It is a system that is competitive, despite the fact that the Draghi report left it out of any discussion. It is a system that is the only global system that has reduced emissions. And when I mention that, people say, but we have to do more. Obviously, we have to do more. But there is something good that we have done. If we have managed to produce more by reducing emissions, while others have managed to produce more by keeping stable or increasing emissions. So what do we learn from that? There are important lessons, and I think it's very positive that at least we recognize once more the strategic role of agriculture. What I see worrying is the fact that we try to open all fronts at the same time, and there is no very clear prioritization of what exactly we want to do. There is one thing that surprised me in the vision paper. You might say that I'm biased based on the title that I have used in the two affiliations we have with the forum in IIASA. But in a text where competitiveness appears 30 times, sustainable productivity doesn't appear once. And for me, this is the main priority we need to focus on, because we have at the global agricultural level and the European agricultural level something that seems to be unique in this century. We have had a very long downward trend of agricultural prices in real terms. Long, we're talking about the 1870s it started, except for brief periods of jumps in agricultural prices during wars, including the two world wars in Korea and also the energy crisis of the 70s. We have had now 25 years in this century where first real prices stabilize and have gone up. But what is happening at the same time is agriculture is not reaping the benefit of these developments, because input costs are going up more than what agricultural prices are going. And also because at the level of the consumer, food inflation increased the price of food much more than what farmers got. Now, if we really have a world problem that requires that we have to produce more with less, and I firmly believe we have, European agriculture needs to actually address this issue. And we have to address this issue focusing on how we can increase productivity in a manner that at the same time reduces the footprint we have. We have many good examples of what is happening on the ground that moves in this direction. And we have to pull this example together in something that is coherent and consistent. And I haven't seen in details this type of orientation, but probably it's for another discussion to go more in details. But for me, that's the missing element. I don't see a very strong commitment that sustainable productivity is the number one priority for European agriculture.
And it was indeed interesting, as you say, that that in the entire vision that productivity, sustainable productivity, wasn't mentioned once. I know you and I have talked about that in other forums. As we come to the end of our discussion this morning, gentlemen, maybe a question to finish with. It's inspired by your byline article that dropped over the weekend, John. You talk about historians potentially looking back on 2025 as a pivotal year in the evolution of what we have termed the rules-based order. You know, from your point of view, John, why do you think that is? And maybe a question to both of you, if it is pivotal, to the extent you can, what comes next?
No, I think as I wrote recently, if climate change hasn't wiped us all out in the next 30, 40 years, our children and grandchildren will be taught at school that indeed 2025 was a pivotal year, like 1789, like 1945, perhaps like 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. So I think what comes next, I don't have a crystal ball, but paranoia is always a good insurance policy. And I'm afraid we're going to see a serious worsening of the world economic situation in the next few years for a range of reasons. And we as I said at the beginning of this podcast, we've seen the dismantling of the rules-based international system, which was set up after World War II, and I think we will see in the outcome, if any, of the negotiations over Russia-Ukraine, and in the aftermath of the genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza, we will see, I think, that the political consensus, the Pax Americana has gone, and it won't come back.
Tassos, final word to you.
If you were to ask this question to my brother, who is an ancient historian, he will tell you it depends on what your sources are. His sources are epigraphs. the sources that we have today is actually the information that circulates out there. And since we talk a lot about artificial intelligence, what of this would have survived for the historian of the future, and how much this is going to be biased by the bots of Trump, Putin, or whoever, will play a major role on the manner by which historians will interpret what is happening. But no matter what bias there would be in the information that will pass to them, they will have to have seen at least one question being asked, or a slogan, "Make America Great Again." And that's the filter, in my view, that the historians of the future are going to judge what we're facing today. Has this actually going to be realized, or is it going to be, a situation that will demonstrate something that happened back in the 1930s, where similar ideas circulated around and had a very negative impact on the U.S. economy and also on the world economy as well. But that's, of course, for the historians of the future to determine for us.
Well, gentlemen, thank you. Sobering thoughts indeed, serious times. No doubt will be good to return to these topics, as we will do in the forum's forthcoming annual conference. But for now, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for sharing with us some of your thoughts and insights on where we currently stand. Well, thank you so much indeed for joining us. You've been watching or listening to another edition of the Food Systems Podcast, brought to you by the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. I've been with John Clarke and Tassos Haniotis. Do join us again next time. All for now.